The snow fell in thick, silent sheets over Grosvenor Square on the night Eleanor Ashford's life ended. Or rather, the night the life she had known ended, violently, irrevocably, with the sharp crack of a mahogany door slamming behind her and her mother's voice cutting through the winter air like a blade. "You are dead to this family. Do you hear me? Dead." Eleanor stood on the frozen cobblestones in nothing but an evening dress and a torn cloak, watching the lights of Ashford House blaze warm and golden behind curtains that would never open for her again. 22 years of life reduced to this. The clothes on her back, the jewelry box clutched in her trembling hands, and the knowledge that she had committed the unforgivable sin of refusing. Refusing Lord Craven. Refusing the marriage her mother had orchestrated. Refusing to save a family that had never truly seen her as more than currency. The square was empty. It was nearly midnight, and respectable people were inside, warm, safe, blind to the girl freezing on their doorsteps. Eleanor took one step, then another, her slippers already soaked through. She didn't know where she was going. She had 3 distant cousins in the country who might take her in out of pity. She had nothing else. She had made perhaps 20 steps when she heard the sound of hooves on snow-muffled stone. A carriage, black and unmarked, drawn by magnificent horses that gleamed even in the dim gaslight. It slowed as it approached, then stopped directly in front of her. Eleanor froze, fear replacing cold as the dominant sensation. Robbers, white slavers, any number of horrors that befell women alone at night. The door opened. A man descended, tall, broad-shouldered, wearing a great coat of exceptional quality and an expression Eleanor could not immediately read. His face was all sharp angles, high cheekbones, a strong jaw, dark eyes that seemed to see everything in a single glance. He looked at her, at the torn cloak, at the townhouse behind her with its closed door, at her bare hands and the small jewelry box she held like a shield. "Miss Eleanor Ashford?" His voice was deep, cultured, with an edge of something Eleanor recognized instinctively as authority. Eleanor's teeth were chattering too hard to answer properly. "How do you know my name?" "I know many things." He stepped closer, removing his gloves. "I know that 2 hours ago you were engaged to Lord Richard Craven. I know that you refused him publicly at your betrothal dinner. I know that your mother just cast you into the street with nothing." He paused. "I know that you have nowhere to go." Eleanor's legs nearly gave out. Not from cold now, but from the sheer impossibility of this stranger knowing her most private disasters. "Who are you?" she whispered. The man's expression shifted. Not quite a smile, but close. It transformed his face from severe to something almost gentle. "I am Alexander Thorne, Duke of Greystone." He held out his hand. "And you, Miss Ashford, are coming with me." I can't," Eleanor stammered. "I don't know you." "No." His voice was calm, matter-of-fact. "But I know you, and I know that if you remain here, you will be dead from exposure within the hour." He stepped even closer, until she could see the snowflakes caught in his dark hair. "You have 2 choices. Come with me now, to safety, to warmth, to a life where you will never be discarded again. Or refuse, and die proving a point to people who will not mourn you." Eleanor stared at him, at this impossible man who had appeared from nowhere with impossible knowledge and an impossible offer. "Why?" The question came out broken. "Why would you help me?" Alexander Thorne looked at her with eyes that held something Eleanor couldn't name. Not pity, something far more complicated. "Because," he said quietly, "you belong with me now." And somehow, impossibly, Eleanor believed him. She took his hand. To understand how Eleanor Ashford ended up freezing in a London street on a December night, one must first understand what she had been before. Decorative, biddable, and utterly expendable. The Ashford family was old but not wealthy, titled but not powerful. Eleanor's father had died when she was 12, leaving behind debts that her mother, the formidable Constance Ashford, had spent a decade attempting to manage through strategy, manipulation, and the systematic suppression of anything that might threaten her plans. Eleanor had been raised like a plant in a conservatory. Carefully pruned, artfully displayed, never allowed to grow in directions that didn't serve the garden's design. She was taught to play the piano but not to compose, to read French but not to discuss philosophy, to smile but never to laugh too loudly, to exist but never to be. She had one sister, Catherine, 3 years younger, prettier in the conventional way their mother preferred. Fair where Eleanor was dark, compliant where Eleanor occasionally dared to question. Catherine was the daughter their mother loved. Eleanor was the daughter their mother used. Your purpose, Constance had told Eleanor on her 16th birthday, is to marry well enough that Catherine might have the season she deserves. You are the eldest. The responsibility falls to you. Eleanor had accepted this. She had no choice, and for 6 years, she had played her role flawlessly. 3 seasons in London, countless balls, carefully orchestrated introductions to increasingly desperate suitors as it became clear that Eleanor, for all her accomplishments, lacked that indefinable quality that made men propose: softness. You're too knowing, her mother had accused after the 3rd proposal that never came. You look at men as though you see through them. It's unsettling. Men don't want to be seen. They want to be adored. Eleanor had tried. She truly had. But something in her refused the performance her mother demanded. Some core of self that wouldn't bend quite far enough. Until Lord Richard Craven, 53 years old, twice widowed, wealthy but not liked, with a reputation for preferences that polite society whispered about but never named aloud. He was also desperate for an heir after 2 barren marriages, and willing to overlook Eleanor's unfortunate directness in exchange for youth and presumably fertile blood. Constance had been ecstatic. You'll be Lady Craven. You'll have a house in town and an estate in Yorkshire. Catherine can have a proper come out. You'll have done your duty. Eleanor had agreed. What choice did she have? Spinsterhood? Poverty? The vague horror of ending up a companion to some distant relation? So she had endured Lord Craven's clammy hands and wet lips during courtship. She had smiled through his inspections of her person, his comments about her hips being suitable for childbearing, his casual mentions of how his previous wives had failed him. She had endured until the betrothal dinner. It was supposed to be a quiet family affair, both families, a few close friends, an announcement in the Morning Post to follow. Eleanor had dressed in white as instructed, had descended the stairs to applause, had sat beside Lord Craven as he announced their engagement with the enthusiasm of a man discussing livestock. And then he leaned over and whispered in her ear, "I look forward to teaching you proper obedience, my dear. My last wife was far too spirited. I had to break her of it." The words were said casually, conversationally, as though discussing the weather. And something in Eleanor, that core of self she tried so hard to suppress, simply refused. She stood. She removed the ring he'd just placed on her finger. And in front of 20 witnesses, she said clearly, "I cannot marry you, Lord Craven. I'm sorry." The silence that followed was absolute. Constance's face had gone white, then red, then a mottled purple that suggested apoplexy. Catherine had gasped dramatically. Lord Craven had simply stared, too shocked to even sputter. "Eleanor," her mother had hissed, "sit down. Now." No. That single word had sealed her fate. No respectable family tolerated disobedience. No mother forgave public humiliation. And Constance Ashford, who had sacrificed everything to maintain their position, who had squeezed every penny and orchestrated every introduction, would not tolerate her daughter destroying 6 years of planning for something as worthless as principle. The guests had been hurried out with profuse apologies. Eleanor had been dragged upstairs by her mother's iron grip. And in the privacy of her bedroom, Constance had delivered her verdict. "You are no daughter of mine. You have destroyed this family. You have ruined Catherine's prospects. You have made us a laughingstock." Her voice had been cold, controlled, more frightening than if she'd shouted. "You will pack a single bag. You will take nothing of value. And you will leave this house tonight. I don't care where you go. I don't care if you live or die. But you will never set foot in Ashford House again." Eleanor had packed in numb silence. A spare dress, a cloak, the jewelry box her grandmother had left her, the only thing that was truly hers. She'd walked down the stairs for the last time, through the foyer where she'd taken her first steps as a child, past the drawing room where she'd practiced the pianoforte for hours. Catherine had been waiting in the hallway. For one moment, Eleanor had hoped. "I hate you," Catherine had said, tears streaming down her pretty face. "You've ruined everything. I'll never forgive you." And then Eleanor had been pushed out into the snow. Now, sitting in the Duke of Greystone's carriage, wrapped in a fur blanket that was warmer than anything she'd ever owned, Eleanor finally allowed herself to feel the full magnitude of what had happened. She was ruined, utterly and completely. No family, no money, no prospects, no future. A woman alone in London was worse than dead. She was vulnerable to every sort of exploitation, visible only to predators. And yet, the Duke, Alexander Thorne, sat across from her, silent but somehow not threatening. He had given her the blanket without a word, instructed the driver to make for his London residence, and then settled back against the upholstery as though rescuing disgraced women from snowstorms was a regular occurrence. Eleanor studied him through her lashes. He was perhaps 30, handsome in a severe way that suggested he rarely smiled. There was something about his bearing that spoke of absolute control, over himself, over his surroundings, over situations that would leave other men floundering. "Why did you do it?" The question escaped before Eleanor could stop herself. Alexander turned his dark gaze to her. "Do what?" "Refuse Lord Craven." Eleanor stiffened. "How do you know what he said to me?" "I don't. But I know the kind of man he is." Alexander's voice was flat, matter-of-fact. "And I know that women rarely refuse profitable marriages unless given a very good reason." Eleanor looked down at her hands. "He told me he looked forward to breaking my spirit, as though I were a horse." Silence. When Eleanor dared to look up, she found Alexander's expression had changed. The calm facade had cracked just enough to show something dangerous underneath. "Then you made the right choice," he said quietly. "Whatever the cost. The cost is everything." Eleanor heard her voice break. "I have nothing. I am nothing." "No." The word was sharp, commanding. Alexander leaned forward, his intensity suddenly focused entirely on her. "You have courage. You have principles. You have the strength to choose homelessness over humiliation." He paused. "Those are not nothing, Eleanor Ashford. That is everything." Eleanor felt tears burn behind her eyes. No one had ever spoken to her that way, as though her choice mattered, as though she mattered. "Who are you?" she whispered. "Really?" Alexander settled back, some of the intensity fading. "I told you. Alexander Thorne, Duke of Greystone. I have estates in Northumberland and Cornwall. I have holdings in shipping and railways. I have a seat in the House of Lords that I rarely occupy because I find politics tedious." "That's not what I meant." Eleanor pulled the blanket tighter. "I mean, why were you there? How did you know? What do you want with me?" "Ah." Alexander was quiet for a moment. "Those are better questions." The carriage turned onto a quieter street. Eleanor could see the outlines of massive townhouses through the snow. "I was there," Alexander said finally, "because I was invited to your betrothal dinner. I declined, but I have informants in most households of note, and they keep me apprised of situations that might interest me." "You have spies in my mother's house?" Eleanor couldn't keep the shock from her voice. "I have a footman who reports to my secretary. It's not as dramatic as you're making it sound." Alexander almost smiled. "When I learned what you'd done, refusing Craven publicly, being cast out, I came. Simple as that." "It's not simple at all." Eleanor shook her head. "You don't know me. We've never met. Why would you risk scandal to rescue a ruined woman?" The carriage stopped. Alexander looked out the window, then back at Eleanor. His expression was unreadable. "Because," he said softly, "I know what it's like to be thrown away by people who should have protected you. And I made a promise to myself long ago that if I ever had the power to prevent that happening to someone else, I would." Before Eleanor could respond, the carriage door opened. A butler stood there, impeccably dressed despite the late hour, his face registering no surprise whatsoever at the appearance of a bedraggled young woman. "Your Grace," the butler said smoothly. "Welcome home. Shall I have Mrs. Phillips prepare the rose sweet?" "Yes." Alexander descended, then turned to offer Eleanor his hand. "And send for a physician. Miss Ashford has been exposed to the cold." "I'm fine," Eleanor protested, but her voice was weak even to her own ears. "You're not." Alexander helped her down with surprising gentleness. "But you will be." As Eleanor crossed the threshold of Greystone House, she looked back once at the snowy street, at the carriage that had brought her here, at the impossible turn her life had taken. Behind her lay ruin, scandal, the family that had cast her out. Before her stood a stranger who had claimed she belonged with him. Eleanor didn't know which was more terrifying. Eleanor woke in a bed softer than clouds. For a moment, she thought she dreamed it all. The refusal, the exile, the mysterious Duke. But then she opened her eyes and saw unfamiliar walls, rich wallpaper in shades of rose and cream, morning light filtering through curtains of such fine silk they seemed to glow. She sat up too quickly. Her head swam. She was wearing a nightgown that wasn't hers, made of fabric so fine it felt like wearing air. "Easy, miss." A young maid appeared from nowhere, carrying a tray. "His Grace said you'd be disoriented when you woke. You've been asleep for 14 hours. Eleanor stared. 14. The physician said it was exhaustion and cold. He left a tonic, but honestly, you just needed proper rest. The maid set the tray on the bedside table. "I'm Mary, by the way. I'll be looking after you while you're here." While you're here. As though this were temporary. As though Eleanor had somewhere else to go. "Where is the Duke?" Eleanor asked, her voice still rough from sleep. "In his study, I imagine. He's always there." Mary poured tea with practiced efficiency. "Breakfast first, then I'm to help you dress." "His Grace asked to see you at noon." Eleanor accepted the tea with trembling hands. The china was delicate, hand-painted with tiny flowers. The tea itself was better than anything she'd tasted at Ashford House, despite her mother's pretensions. "Mary," Eleanor said carefully, "did the Duke explain why I'm here?" Mary's face remained perfectly neutral. "His Grace doesn't explain himself to staff, miss. But Mrs. Phillips, she's the housekeeper, told us you were to be treated as an honored guest. That's all I need to know. An honored guest. Not a charity case. Not a problem to be managed." The small dignity of it made Eleanor's throat tight. She ate breakfast in silence. Coddled eggs, perfectly toasted bread, jam that tasted like summer. Real food, after weeks of her mother's economical meals designed to keep Eleanor appropriately slender for the marriage market. Mary helped her dress in a gown that had appeared from somewhere, simple but well-made, in a shade of deep blue that Eleanor had never been allowed to wear. "Your mother always dresses you in pale colors," Constance would say. "Dark colors make you look too serious." But Eleanor liked how she looked in this dress. Seriously, real, like a person rather than a doll. At precisely noon, Mary led her down to the Duke's study. The house was magnificent, larger than Ashford House, but somehow warmer. There were books everywhere, fresh flowers in vases, the kind of casual elegance that came from genuine wealth rather than desperate performance. Mary knocked. "Miss Ashford, Your Grace." "Enter." Eleanor stepped inside and stopped. The study was lined floor to ceiling with books. A fire crackled in the hearth. And at a massive oak desk sat Alexander Thorne, surrounded by papers, looking every inch the Duke he was. He rose when she entered. Perfect manners, despite being in his own home. "Miss Ashford, you look better." "I feel." Eleanor searched for the right word. "Confused." "Understandable." Alexander gestured to a chair near the fire. "Please sit. We have much to discuss." Eleanor sat, her back rigidly straight. She'd been trained too well to ever truly relax in the presence of authority. Alexander took the chair opposite her rather than returning to his desk. The movement was unexpectedly casual, as though they were equals rather than Duke and disgraced woman. "I imagine you have questions," he said. "Hundreds." Eleanor met his gaze directly. "But let's start with the most important one. What do you want from me? Something that might have been approval flickered in Alexander's dark eyes. Direct. I like that. My mother always said it was my worst quality. Your mother, Alexander said flatly, is a fool. The casual dismissal of Constance Ashford, the woman Eleanor had spent 22 years trying to please, was so shocking that Eleanor almost laughed. Almost. You still haven't answered my question, she said instead. Alexander was quiet for a moment, studying her with that same intensity from the night before. When he spoke, his voice was calm, measured, but somehow heavier than before. I need a wife. Eleanor's stomach dropped. I see. I don't think you do. Alexander leaned forward slightly. I'm not proposing out of lust or romance or any of the usual reasons. I'm proposing because I need a duchess, and you need protection. It's a transaction that benefits both of us. Transaction. The word felt like ice water. Eleanor had just escaped one arranged marriage built on transaction. Was she about to walk into another? Why not marry someone of your own class? Eleanor asked. Someone whose family hasn't just cast her out in scandal? Surely you could have any woman in London. I could, Alexander agreed. And that's precisely the problem. Women of my class come with expectations, of love, of romance, of a husband who will dance attendance on them and write them poetry and generally pretend emotions I don't possess. He paused. You, Eleanor Ashford, have no such illusions. You know this is business. And that honesty is worth more to me than any dowry or connection. Eleanor felt something twist in her chest. It wasn't a disappointment. She hadn't expected love. But the cold calculation of it, the frank acknowledgement that she was being chosen precisely because she was desperate enough not to demand humanity. What would be expected of me? She asked quietly. Attendance at social functions when required. Management of the household. Eventually, an heir. Alexander spoke as one might discuss hiring a housekeeper. In exchange, you would have my name, my protection, and my fortune. No one would ever be able to throw you away again. And you? Eleanor couldn't keep the edge from her voice. What do you gain besides duty fulfilled? For the first time, something flickered across Alexander's face. Not emotion exactly, but the shadow of something held tightly in check. Peace, he said finally. I gain peace. No expectations I cannot meet. No demands for feelings I cannot give. A partnership of convenience that doesn't pretend to be more than it is. Eleanor stared at him, at this powerful man who had everything except, apparently, the capacity for love. Or perhaps the desire for it. You're asking me to marry you, she said slowly. Knowing that you will never love me. Yes. That we will be partners in name only, except for the necessity of producing an heir. Yes. That I will be a duchess in title but essentially a very well-paid employee. Alexander's jaw tightened. If you want to phrase it that way. Eleanor stood. She walked to the fire, feeling its heat against her face. Behind her, Alexander remained silent, letting her think. She had no family, no money, no prospects. In a few days, the scandal of her refusal of Lord Craven would spread through London like plague. She would be unemployable, unmarriageable, untouchable. But, I want terms, Eleanor said, turning to face him. Alexander's eyebrows rose fractionally. Terms. If I'm to be a wife in a transaction, then I want the terms to be clear. Eleanor lifted her chin. I will not be locked away in the country. I will have freedom to read what I choose, go where I choose within reason. I will have my own money, a generous allowance that I control, not you. Agreed. I will not be expected to pretend affection I don't feel in private. In public, I will perform the role of duchess flawlessly. But in private, we maintain honesty. Agreed. Alexander stood as well, walking closer. What else? Eleanor's heart was racing. She had never negotiated for herself in her life. But something about Alexander's calm acceptance made her brave. If you take a mistress, you will be discreet. I will not be humiliated. I have no intention of taking a mistress. Alexander's voice was flat. I find the complications tedious. And children. Eleanor forced herself to say it. When the time comes for the heir, it will be done with respect. Not as though I'm livestock. Something dark flashed in Alexander's eyes. Anger, but not at her. The man who made you feel you needed to specify that, he said quietly, should be horsewhipped. Eleanor felt tears prick her eyes. She blinked them back fiercely. Do we have an agreement? She asked. Alexander extended his hand. We do. I'll arrange for a special license. We can be married within the week. Eleanor looked at his hand. This was madness. Marrying a man she didn't know, who had openly stated he would never love her, in exchange for security and a name. But it was madness with terms she had negotiated herself. Madness that gave her power, not stripped it away. She took his hand. His grip was warm, firm, steadying. For just a moment, Eleanor let herself believe that perhaps this cold arrangement might be better than the passionate marriage market that had nearly destroyed her. One more thing, Alexander said, still holding her hand. Yes, you will never be thrown away again. Not by me. Not by anyone. His dark eyes held hers with absolute certainty. You belong with me now, and I protect what's mine. The possessiveness should have frightened her. Instead, after a lifetime of being expendable, it felt like the first safe thing anyone had ever offered her. Thank you, Eleanor whispered. Alexander released her hand and stepped back, the moment of connection severed as efficiently as it had been created. Mrs. Phillips will help you prepare. The ceremony will be private, just us and witnesses. Afterward, we'll spend a week in London so you can be properly fitted for clothing. Then we'll retire to Greystone Hall in Northumberland. So quickly. The faster we leave London, the less society can speculate. Alexander returned to his desk, already shifting back to business. Your mother will likely attempt to contact you once she realizes what's happened. I'll have my secretary handle any correspondence. You need never see her again if you choose. The casual dismissal of Constance Ashford, removing her from Eleanor's life with the efficiency of discarding a worn glove, was both terrifying and liberating. What if I want to see my sister? Eleanor asked quietly. Alexander looked up. For a moment, his expression softened infinitesimally. Catherine is always welcome here, if she comes. The unspoken understanding hung in the air. Catherine, raised by Constance, trained to value position over principle, would likely never forgive Eleanor for destroying her prospects. She won't, Eleanor said. Then she's a fool as well. Alexander returned to his papers. Mary will show you to the library. I thought you might enjoy it while I finish this work. Eleanor recognized dismissal when she heard it. She curtsied, habit died hard, and left. The library was magnificent. 3 stories of books, connected by spiral staircases, with reading nooks tucked into alcoves and windows overlooking the snow-covered garden. Eleanor had never seen so many books outside of a lending library. She ran her fingers along the spines, reading titles. Philosophy, poetry, novels that would have sent her mother into fits. Travel accounts, scientific treatises, everything arranged not by propriety but by subject. She pulled down a volume at random. Mary Wollstonecraft's Vindication of the Rights of Women. The book her mother had forbidden, calling it dangerous nonsense that fills women's heads with dissatisfaction. Eleanor sank into a window seat and opened it. She read for hours, losing herself in arguments for women's education, for rational thought over decorative ignorance, for the revolutionary idea that women were human beings capable of more than ornament. When a footman came to announce dinner, Eleanor was halfway through the book and crying. Not from sadness, from relief, from the stunning realization that someone, somewhere, had articulated the frustration she'd felt her entire life but never had words for. She went to dinner still clutching the book. Alexander was already seated. He looked up when she entered, his gaze going to the book in her hands. Something shifted in his expression. You found Wollstonecraft, he said. You have Wollstonecraft, Eleanor replied, setting the book carefully on the sideboard. My mother would say that's scandalous. Your mother says many things that are incorrect. Alexander waited until she was seated before gesturing for the first course to be served. What do you think of it? No one had ever asked Eleanor what she thought of anything. They had asked if she could play the piece her mother selected, if she found Lord Craven agreeable, if she understood her duty, but never what she thought. I think, Eleanor said slowly, that I've been angry my entire life without understanding why, and now I understand. Alexander was quiet for a moment. Then, good. Anger is useful. It means you haven't accepted what was done to you as natural or right. They ate in silence for a while. It wasn't uncomfortable exactly, but it was strange. Eleanor kept expecting conversation, performance, the exhausting social dance her mother had drilled into her. Instead, Alexander seemed content to simply eat, occasionally glancing at Eleanor with an expression that might have been curiosity. "You're allowed to speak," he said finally, a hint of something that might have been amusing in his voice. "I wasn't sure if you wanted conversation or silence. Either is fine." Alexander set down his fork. "I'm not one of those men who requires constant entertainment from his companions. If you wish to speak, speak. If you prefer silence, that's equally acceptable." The permission, the acknowledgement that her preferences mattered, was so novel that Eleanor found herself blinking back tears again. "I cry too much," she muttered, embarrassed. "You've earned the right." Alexander's voice was surprisingly gentle. "You've had your entire life appended in 24 hours. Tears are reasonable. Are you always this understanding?" "No." Alexander picked up his wine glass. "Usually I'm considered quite cold, unfeeling even, but I find that people who deserve compassion rarely receive it, while people who deserve nothing demand it constantly." He met her eyes. "You deserve compassion, Eleanor Ashford, even if you've rarely been given it." Eleanor stared at him. This man who claimed to be incapable of emotion, who had proposed a marriage of cold transaction, who spoke of wives and heirs as though discussing property acquisition. This same man had rescued her from a snowstorm, negotiated fair terms without argument, filled his library with dangerous books, and just given her the most compassionate thing anyone had ever said to her. "I don't understand you," Eleanor admitted. "You will. Eventually." Alexander stood. "I have work to finish. Feel free to take books to your room." And Eleanor, "Yes. Sleep well. The week ahead will be demanding." He left her alone with the remainder of dinner and her thoughts. Eleanor returned to the library and selected 5 more books, carrying them to her room like treasure. As she climbed into the impossibly soft bed, surrounded by ideas and arguments and revolutionary thoughts, she realized something that would have horrified her mother. She wasn't mourning the family she'd lost. She was relieved to be free of them. And the man who had freed her, cold, controlled, emotionally armored Alexander Thorne, might not love her. But he had done something no one else ever had. He had treated her like a human being who deserved choices. That, Eleanor thought as she drifted to sleep, might be more valuable than love. The wedding took place 3 days later in a small chapel attached to Greystone House. Eleanor wore a dress of cream silk that had been produced with impossible speed by a modiste who asked no questions about the rush timeline or the bride's lack of family. Alexander wore formal black, every inch the Duke, and spoke his vows with the same calm precision he brought to business contracts. There were 4 people present: the vicar, the housekeeper Mrs. Phillips as witness, Alexander's secretary Mr. Thornberry, and Eleanor herself. No family, no celebration, no illusions. When the vicar pronounced them man and wife, Alexander kissed Eleanor's hand rather than her lips. The gesture was courtly, distant, exactly what their arrangement called for. "Your Grace," the vicar said to Eleanor, acknowledging her new title. Eleanor Ashford was dead. Long live Eleanor Thorne, Duchess of Greystone. They signed the register in silence. Mr. Thornberry offered quiet congratulations. Mrs. Phillips dabbed at her eyes, which surprised Eleanor until she remembered that the housekeeper had worked for the Thorne family for 30 years and probably had feelings about her employer's marriage, even one as clinical as this. "I've arranged for the announcement to appear in tomorrow's papers," Mr. Thornberry told Alexander as they left the chapel. Tasteful, brief, emphasizing your long-standing admiration for the Duchess and your mutual desire for privacy. No mention of the Ashford family's theatrics? Alexander asked. None whatsoever. As far as society will know, this was a whirlwind romance between two private individuals who chose to marry quietly. Alexander nodded, satisfied. Eleanor, we have appointments this afternoon with the modiste and jeweler. I'll need you to accompany me. Of course. Eleanor was still adjusting to being addressed as though her presence mattered in decisions about her own life. The modest appointment was overwhelming. Madame Celeste's shop was the finest in London, patronized by royalty and the wealthiest families. Eleanor had never been inside, though her mother had once tried to drag her in before being turned away for insufficient credit. Now, as the Duchess of Greystone, Eleanor was ushered to a private salon and treated as though she were made of spun glass. Your Grace, Madame Celeste purred, circling Eleanor with assessing eyes. We shall make you magnifique. His Grace has impeccable taste. I trust you to use your judgment, Alexander said, settling into a chair near the window. Everything appropriate for a duchess. Day dresses, evening gowns, riding habits, traveling clothes. She'll need a complete wardrobe. And color preferences? Madame Celeste pulled out swatches of fabric. Whatever suits her. Alexander looked at Eleanor. You choose. Eleanor blinked. In her mother's world, clothing choices were dictated by what was fashionable and what made Catherine look prettier by comparison. Eleanor had rarely been asked what she liked. Eleanor touched a swatch of deep emerald silk. I've always wanted to wear jewel tones. Rich colors. Jewel tones it is. Madame Celeste beamed. With your coloring, you will be devastating in sapphire, emerald, ruby red. None of these insipid pastels that wash out brunettes. For the next 2 hours, Eleanor was measured, draped with fabrics, consulted on styles. Alexander remained in his chair, working through correspondence, occasionally looking up to nod approval at a particular gown or suggest a more practical design for riding. He was, Eleanor realized, giving her choices while also ensuring she would be appropriately dressed for her new role. It was manipulation, but gentle manipulation. Guidance without control. The ruby silk, Alexander said as Eleanor modeled a particularly striking evening gown. That one for the Hastings ball next month. We're attending the Hastings ball? Eleanor asked, surprised. We're returning to society as a couple. The faster we establish you as Duchess of Greystone, the faster the gossip about Miss Ashford's scandal fades. Alexander's logic was impeccable. You'll need armor. That gown is armor. Eleanor looked at herself in the mirror. The ruby silk clung to her figure, the neckline dramatic but not improper, the overall effect powerful rather than pretty. She looked like someone who could face down a ballroom of whispers without flinching. Yes, she agreed. This one. The jeweler's appointment was even more surreal. Mr. Pemberton arrived at Greystone House with cases of treasures that made Eleanor's eyes widen. The Greystone collection, Alexander explained. My mother's jewelry and my grandmother's. I thought you should choose what appeals to you. Eleanor stared at diamonds that could ransom kingdoms, emeralds the size of robin's eggs, sapphires that seemed to hold entire oceans. It was beautiful and terrifying. I can't possibly wear these, she whispered. Why not? You're the Duchess of Greystone. They belong to you now. Alexander selected a strand of pearls, simple and elegant. Start with these for day wear. And these, he lifted a set of sapphire earrings, for the Hastings ball. Your Grace shows excellent taste, Mr. Pemberton approved. Might I also suggest the Greystone betrothal ring? He produced a ring that made Eleanor's breath catch. A perfect square-cut diamond surrounded by smaller sapphires, set in platinum. It was the most beautiful thing she'd ever seen. It's been in the family for 4 generations, Alexander said quietly. If you'd rather have something new. No. Eleanor surprised herself with the vehemence of her response. This one, if you think it's appropriate. Alexander slipped the ring onto her finger himself. Fit perfectly. Now you look married, he said. and something in his voice made Eleanor's chest tighten. That evening, they dined together again. The silence was becoming familiar, almost comfortable. Alexander read correspondence between courses. Eleanor had brought Mary Wollstonecraft and was reading passages that particularly struck her. "Listen to this," she said suddenly, then froze. "I'm sorry. I didn't mean to interrupt." "You didn't." Alexander set down his papers. "What does she say?" "I do not wish women to have power over men, but over themselves." Eleanor looked up. "That's all I wanted. Power over myself. The right to make my own choices. And now you have it." Alexander's dark eyes held hers. "Do you regret accepting my offer?" Eleanor considered. In 3 days, she had gone from homeless and ruined to being a duchess with more wealth and power than she'd ever imagined. But she'd also entered a marriage without love, with a man who had been very clear that he would never love her. "No," she said honestly. "I don't regret it. Do you?" "No." Alexander resumed his meal. "You're intelligent, adaptable, and you don't expect me to perform emotions I don't possess. As far as arranged marriages go, I think we'll manage quite well." Shouldn't have hurt. Eleanor had known from the beginning what this was. But something about the casual acknowledgement that their marriage was merely manageable stung more than she wanted to admit. She returned to her book without responding. The next day, Alexander had meetings that would keep him occupied until evening. "Feel free to explore the house," he told Eleanor at breakfast. "Everything is open to you except my private study when the door is closed. Otherwise, consider this your home." Your home. 2 words that meant everything and nothing. Eleanor spent the morning exploring Greystone House properly. It was enormous, 30 rooms at least, each more beautiful than the last. The ballroom could hold 200 people easily. The conservatory held orchids and tropical plants that seemed impossible in London's winter. The music room had a piano that was probably worth more than the entire contents of Ashford House. She found herself in a portrait gallery on the 2nd floor. Generations of thorns stared down at her with various expressions of aristocratic superiority. She studied them, trying to see Alexander in their faces. "That's my mother." Eleanor jumped. Alexander had appeared silently behind her. He gestured to a portrait of a beautiful woman with dark hair and sad eyes. "She looks unhappy," Eleanor observed. She was. Alexander's voice was flat. "My father was a bastard who kept mistresses openly and treated her like decorative furniture. She died when I was 12. Influenza, officially. But I think she died of being ignored." The revelation was shocking, not for its content but for the fact that Alexander had shared it at all. In 3 days, he had been unfailingly polite but distant. This felt like the first real thing he'd told her. "I'm sorry," Eleanor said quietly. "Don't be. She's been dead for 18 years. But it taught me something important." Alexander turned to look at Eleanor directly. "What kills people isn't lack of love. It's a lack of respect. Being treated as though your existence doesn't matter." Eleanor understood then, with sudden clarity, why Alexander had rescued her from the snow. Why he'd offered her a marriage of transaction with fair terms rather than trying to seduce her with false promises. He knew what it was to be decorative furniture in someone else's life. "Is that why you don't want love?" Eleanor asked before she could stop herself. "Because you watched what it did to your mother?" Alexander was quiet for a long moment. When he spoke, his voice was careful, controlled. "I don't want love because I don't believe in it. Love is a lie people tell themselves to justify possession. Respect, fairness, clear expectations, those are real. Those can be trusted." Eleanor wanted to argue, wanted to insist that love was more than possession, that her parents had loved each other truly before her father's death. But then she remembered her mother's love for Catherine. Possessive, controlling, using her daughter as an extension of her own ambitions. And she thought of Lord Craven, who probably believed he loved his wives even as he broke them. Maybe Alexander was right. Maybe respect was more valuable than love. "Thank you," Eleanor said, "for telling me about your mother. You're my wife. You should understand why I am the way I am." Alexander's lips quirked in something that wasn't quite a smile. Even if the way I am is generally considered quite cold. You're not cold. The words escaped before Eleanor could reconsider them. You're careful. There's a difference. Something flickered in Alexander's eyes. Surprise, perhaps, or vulnerability quickly hidden. I should return to my meetings, he said, stepping back. But Eleanor, if you ever feel like decorative furniture in this house, tell me. That's not what I want. He left before she could respond. Eleanor stood in the portrait gallery for a long time after, staring at the sad-eyed woman who had died of being ignored, and thinking about the careful man who had promised to respect her. It wasn't love, but maybe it was something better. That night, Eleanor couldn't sleep. She'd been having nightmares since leaving Ashford House. Dreams of being back in the snow, freezing, with no one coming to rescue her. Dreams of Lord Craven's wet lips and her mother's cold eyes. She gave up on sleep around 2 in the morning and went to the library, thinking books might quiet her mind. She wasn't expecting to find Alexander there. He was seated in one of the window alcoves, still fully dressed despite the late hour, reading by lamplight. He looked up when she entered. "Can't sleep?" he asked. "Nightmares." Eleanor hesitated in the doorway. "I'm sorry. I didn't mean to disturb you." "You're not disturbing me. I rarely sleep well." Alexander gestured to the chair opposite him. "Company is welcome." Eleanor settled into the chair, tucking her feet under her dressing gown. It felt strangely intimate, the two of them alone in the lamplight while the house slept around them. "What are you reading?" she asked. Alexander showed her the book. Smith's Wealth of Nations. Dry but useful. "And you read it at 2 in the morning?" "I read everything at 2 in the morning. Sleep and I have an uneasy relationship." He set the book aside. "What are your nightmares about?" Eleanor hadn't expected the direct question. But something about the late hour, the gentle lamplight, the privacy, made her answer honestly. "My mother, Lord Craven, being cast out again." She pulled the dressing gown tighter. "Waking up and discovering this was all a dream and I'm still freezing in the snow." Alexander was quiet for a moment. Then he stood and disappeared into another section of the library, returning with a bottle and 2 glasses. "Brandy," he explained, pouring. "It won't stop the nightmares, but it might help you sleep afterward." Eleanor accepted the glass. The brandy burned pleasantly on the way down. "You won't be cast out," Alexander said after they'd both been silent for a while. "I don't break my promises. You're the Duchess of Greystone. That's not something I can take back even if I wanted to." "And do you want to?" Eleanor heard herself ask. "No." Alexander met her eyes directly. "You're proving to be exactly what I hoped. Intelligent, resilient, honest. I'd be a fool to regret this arrangement." It was such an Alexander thing to say, a compliment phrased as business assessment. Eleanor found herself smiling despite everything. "You're proving to be less terrible than expected as well," she said. Alexander's lips twitched. High praise. They sat in companionable silence, drinking brandy and listening to the house settle around them. Eleanor felt herself relaxing for the first time since the betrothal dinner. "Eleanor," Alexander said eventually, "may I ask you something?" "Yes." "Do you hate me for this? For offering you a marriage without love?" The question was so unexpected, so vulnerable from a man who prided himself on emotional control, that Eleanor needed a moment to formulate her answer. "No," she said finally. "I don't hate you. She searched for the right word. "I'm grateful, and relieved, and sometimes confused. But I don't hate you." "Good." Alexander finished his brandy. "I wouldn't want you to hate me. Indifference I can manage. Active hatred seems exhausting." Eleanor laughed. Actually laughed. "That's the most Alexander thing you've ever said." "Alexander thing?" "Ruthlessly practical even about emotions." Eleanor stood. "Thank you for the brandy and the company. I think I can sleep now." "Eleanor," Alexander said as she reached the door. She turned back. "You're safe here. I meant what I said that first night. You belong with me now." No one will ever throw you away again. The words shouldn't have meant as much as they did. This was a business arrangement, a transaction, a marriage of convenience and necessity. But as Eleanor climbed back into her bed, warmed by brandy and the memory of lamplight and unexpectedly gentle conversation, she felt safer than she had in years. And she realized with startling clarity, she was beginning to trust Alexander Thorne. That was far more dangerous than nightmares. The trouble began, as Eleanor should have expected, with her mother. 2 weeks after the wedding, as Eleanor and Alexander prepared to leave London for Greystone Hall in Northumberland, a letter arrived. Mrs. Phillips brought it to Eleanor during breakfast, her expression suggesting she knew exactly who it was from and disapproved entirely. Eleanor broke the seal with trembling fingers. Eleanor, your shocking behavior has been the talk of London for a fortnight. To refuse Lord Craven publicly, bringing disgrace upon this family, and then to trap a duke into marriage through methods I can only assume were entirely inappropriate. It speaks to a calculating nature I never suspected you possessed. However, I am willing to forgive. Catherine's prospects have been severely damaged by your scandal, but perhaps with your new position, you might introduce her to a suitable gentleman. I expect an invitation to Greystone Hall within the month, and a generous settlement to compensate for the dowry we lost when you destroyed the Craven match. Your mother, Constance Ashford. Eleanor read it twice, her hands shaking harder with each word. The audacity was breathtaking. After casting her out to die in the snow, Constance now expected Eleanor to not only forgive, but to actively assist the family that had abandoned her. Bad news? Alexander asked, looking up from his own correspondence. Eleanor handed him the letter without speaking. Alexander read it, his expression growing progressively colder. When he finished, he set it down with excessive care, the way one might handle a poisonous snake. Your mother, he said with impressive restraint, is the most remarkable combination of cruelty and entitlement I have ever encountered. She wants money and access to your connections, Eleanor said numbly. She's using Catherine as leverage because she knows She stopped. She'd been about to say, because she knows I love my sister. But did she? Catherine had told her she'd ruined everything. Catherine had watched her be cast out and done nothing. She knows you have a conscience, Alexander finished for her. And she's weaponizing it. He stood. I'll have Thornbury draft a response. What will it say? That the Duchess of Greystone has no relationship with the Ashford family, that any further correspondence will be discarded unread, and that any attempts to approach you in person will result in legal action. Alexander's voice was ice. She cast you out, Eleanor. She doesn't get to reclaim you now that you're useful. Eleanor knew he was right. And yet, what about Catherine? She asked quietly. I know she said terrible things, but she was raised by our mother. She doesn't know any other way to be. Alexander studied her. Do you want to see Catherine? I don't know. Eleanor pressed her hands to her face. Part of me wants to believe she might be different from our mother's influence. But I can't forget what she said. Then we'll leave the door open, Alexander decided. If Catherine wishes to contact you directly, without your mother's involvement, she may. But Constance Ashford is forbidden from this house and from your life. Agreed. Agreed. Eleanor felt some of the tension ease. Thank you. You don't thank me for basic decency, Eleanor. Alexander returned to his seat. Now, shall we discuss the arrangements for Northumberland? But Constance Ashford was not a woman who accepted dismissal gracefully. 3 days later, as Eleanor and Alexander attended their first public event as a married couple, a musical at Lady Pemberton's, Constance made her move. Eleanor saw her mother across the room and froze. Constance looked magnificent in purple silk, every inch the society matron, flanked by Catherine, who looked miserable in pale pink. She's here, Eleanor whispered to Alexander. I see her. Alexander's hand tightened on Eleanor's arm. Ignore her. We'll greet Lady Pemberton and leave. But Constance was already moving through the crowd toward them, dragging Catherine in her wake. Society parted before her, sensing drama the way sharks sense blood. Eleanor, Constance's voice carried across the room. My dear daughter, How wonderful to see you looking so well. The hypocrisy was stunning. Eleanor felt Alexander go rigid beside her. Mrs. Ashford, Eleanor said coldly. I'm surprised to see you here. Surprised? Why would you be surprised? We're family. Constance embraced Eleanor despite Eleanor's rigid resistance. I was so worried about you after your sudden departure. But seeing you now as Duchess of Greystone. She turned to Alexander with a dazzling smile. Your Grace, you must be so pleased with your bride. Though I confess, we were rather hurt not to be invited to the wedding. The wedding was private, Alexander said, his voice glacial. As I believe my secretary communicated to you. Oh, but surely family, Constance began. We are not family, Eleanor interrupted, surprising herself with her vehemence. You cast me out with nothing. You told me you didn't care if I lived or died. Those were your words, Mother. I haven't forgotten them. The room had gone completely quiet. Everyone was listening now, not even pretending otherwise. Constance's face went white, then red. Eleanor, you're being dramatic. I was upset about Lord Craven. But I never. You pushed me into the snow and slammed the door in my face. Eleanor's voice was steady now. Years of suppressed anger finally finding its release. You told me I was dead to you, so I am granting your wish. I am dead to you. Please act accordingly. How dare you? Constance hissed, her facade cracking. After everything I've done for you, the sacrifices I've made. You sacrificed nothing. Eleanor stepped forward, and she felt powerful in her ruby silk armor, with Alexander's solid presence at her back. You used me as currency to buy Catherine a better position. And when I refused to be sold, you discarded me. That's not a sacrifice. That's cruelty. Your Grace, Catherine spoke for the first time, her voice small. Eleanor, please. Mother didn't mean. Don't. Eleanor looked at her sister, seeing clearly for the first time how much Catherine had been molded into their mother's image. You stood there and watched. You told me you hated me, so hate me if you must. But don't pretend this is something other than what it is. You selfish, ungrateful. Constance started forward, and Eleanor wasn't sure what her mother intended. To strike her perhaps, or simply to scream, but she never found out, because Alexander stepped between them, his considerable height and presence suddenly very apparent. Touch my wife, he said quietly, and I will destroy you. The threat was delivered with such calm certainty that it was somehow more frightening than if he'd shouted. Constance stepped back instinctively. I will ruin you socially, Alexander continued in that same conversational tone. I will ensure every door in London closes to you. I will make certain Catherine never receives another invitation to any event of consequence. I will systematically dismantle whatever social standing you have left until you are as powerless as you tried to make Eleanor. You can't, Constance sputtered. I absolutely can. I'm the Duke of Greystone. I have more power and influence than you can possibly imagine. And I will use every bit of it to ensure you never trouble my Duchess again. He offered Eleanor his arm. We're leaving. Eleanor took his arm, her hand shaking. As they walked toward the door, the crowd parted like water, no one willing to side against a duke defending his wife. Just before they reached the exit, Eleanor heard Catherine call out, Eleanor, wait! She turned. Catherine stood alone now, Constance having been swept up by Lady Pemberton's butler and discreetly removed. Her sister looked young and frightened and lost. I'm sorry, Catherine whispered, tears streaming down her face. I was wrong. Mother was wrong. I'm so sorry. Eleanor wanted to stay angry, wanted to maintain the cold distance that would protect her. But she looked at Catherine and saw herself. A girl trapped by Constance's ambitions, molded into a shape that served others, never herself. If you mean that, Eleanor said quietly, truly mean it, then prove it. Think for yourself. Make your own choices. Stop being Mother's puppet. She paused. And if you do that, if you find your own spine, then perhaps we can be sisters again. But not until then. Catherine nodded, still crying. I'll try. I promise I'll try. Eleanor and Alexander left Lady Pemberton's musical in silence. The carriage ride back to Greystone House was equally quiet, Alexander apparently content to let Eleanor process what had happened. It wasn't until they were back in the library, their refuge, that Eleanor finally spoke. "Thank you," she said, "for defending me. Always." Alexander poured brandy for both of them. "Though I think you were defending yourself quite effectively before I intervened. I've never done that before. I stood up to my mother like that." Eleanor accepted the glass. It was terrifying. It was magnificent. Alexander raised his glass in a small salute. "You've been spending too much time with Wollstonecraft. You're becoming dangerous." Eleanor laughed, surprised she could after the evening's drama. "Is that a complaint? An observation? I prefer my Duchess to be dangerous." Alexander's dark eyes held hers. "Compliant women bore me. You never have." The compliment, delivered in Alexander's typical matter-of-fact way, made Eleanor's chest tight. This man who claimed he couldn't feel, who had married her as a transaction, kept proving over and over that his actions spoke louder than his words. "I meant what I told Catherine," Eleanor said after a moment, "about being sisters again if she changes. Was that foolish?" "It was hopeful. There's a difference." Alexander sat beside her on the sofa, closer than usual. "Hope isn't foolish, Eleanor. It's human. Don't let your mother's cruelty steal that from you." Eleanor looked at him, really looked at him, at the man who had rescued her, married her, defended her, given her freedom and books and safety and respect. The man who claimed he was cold and unfeeling but kept proving otherwise. "Alexander," she said quietly, "why did you really marry me?" He was silent for so long that Eleanor thought he might not answer. Then, "Because when I saw you standing in the snow, cast out by people who should have protected you, refusing to beg or break or diminish yourself, I recognized something." His voice was low, controlled, but something underneath suggested emotion held tightly in check. "I recognized the person I wish I'd been at 12, when my mother was dying and my father didn't care. I recognized the strength I'd had to build in pieces over years. And I thought, she shouldn't have to build that alone." Eleanor's breath caught. "That's not a business reason." "No." Alexander met her eyes. "It's not. I lied to you, Eleanor. Or perhaps to myself. I told you I was marrying you as a transaction. But the truth is, I married you because I saw in you something worth protecting. Worth keeping safe. Worth." He stopped, swallowed hard. "Worth caring about," Eleanor finished softly. Alexander didn't confirm or deny. He simply looked at her with eyes that held too much vulnerability, too much truth, too much of the emotion he claimed not to possess. "I don't know how to do this," he said finally. "I don't know how to be a husband beyond providing and protecting. I don't know how to love." Eleanor supplied. "Yes." The admission seemed to cost him. "I've spent 18 years avoiding any emotion that might make me vulnerable the way my mother was vulnerable. And now you're here, in my house, reading dangerous books in my library, standing up to your mother with that fire in your eyes, and I don't know how to maintain the distance I need to stay safe." Eleanor set down her glass. She reached out slowly, giving Alexander every opportunity to retreat, and took his hand. "What if," she said carefully, "we learned together? What if we stopped pretending this is only a transaction and admitted that somewhere in the past 2 weeks, we've become something more?" "I could hurt you," Alexander said. "My father hurt my mother by being incapable of love. I could do the same to you." "You're not your father." Eleanor squeezed his hand. "Your father didn't respect women. He saw them as decorative. You've spent 2 weeks treating me like an equal. That's not nothing, Alexander. That's everything. Is it enough?" His voice was raw in a way Eleanor had never heard before. "Can respect become something more? Or am I deluding myself that I'm capable of more than cold arrangements?" Eleanor thought about the past 2 weeks. The books were left for her to find. The late-night conversations. The careful way Alexander always asked her preferences. The fierce protection of her dignity. The gentle questions about her nightmares. The brandy and lamplight slowly built trust. "I think," she said slowly, "that you've already become something more. You've just been too afraid to name it." Alexander stared at their joined hands. "What if I fail? What if I can't be what you deserve?" "Then we fail together." Eleanor smiled. "We're partners, remember? That was the agreement. Partners share failures as well as successes." "That's not what I agreed to," Alexander protested. But something in his face had softened. Hope, perhaps, or the beginnings of trust in something beyond his careful control. "Then we're renegotiating the terms." Eleanor brought his hand to her lips and kissed his knuckles, the same courtly gesture he'd given her at their wedding. "New term. We're allowed to care about each other." "That's a dangerous term," Alexander said, but he didn't pull his hand away. "All the best terms are." Eleanor's smile widened. "Do you accept?" For a long moment Alexander didn't answer. Then, slowly, he brought their joined hands to his chest, placing her palm over his heart. Eleanor could feel it beating, fast and steady. "I accept," he said quietly. "God help us both." Eleanor leaned forward and kissed him. Not the distant kiss of their wedding ceremony, but something real. Something that tasted like brandy and hope, and the beginning of something neither of them had expected when they'd made their careful arrangement. When they pulled apart, Alexander rested his forehead against hers. "I'm going to fail at this," he warned. "I'm going to retreat behind cold walls when things become too intense. I'm going to forget to say the right things at the right times. And I'm going to push you when you retreat," Eleanor replied. "I'm going to demand you be present even when it's uncomfortable. I'm going to refuse to let you hide." "Terrifying." "Absolutely." Eleanor kissed him again. "But we were both brave enough to stand in a snowstorm and trust a stranger. I think we can be brave enough for this." Alexander pulled her closer, his arms coming around her with a certainty that suggested he'd been wanting to hold her for longer than he'd admitted. "You belong with me," he murmured against her hair. "I meant that the first night, but I didn't realize how much I'd come to mean it." Eleanor settled against his chest, listening to his heartbeat, feeling safer than she'd ever felt in her life. "Good," she said simply. "Because you're stuck with me now, Duke Greystone." "Good," Alexander echoed, and Eleanor could hear the smile in his voice. "Because I have no intention of letting you go." They stayed like that for hours, tangled together on the library sofa, talking and not talking, building something new from the ashes of cold arrangements and protective distance. And when they finally climbed the stairs together, Alexander's hand in hers, Eleanor realized that the transaction had become something infinitely more precious. She had found not just safety but a home. And Alexander, the cold duke who claimed he couldn't love, had found someone brave enough to teach him otherwise. The weeks that followed the confrontation with Constance were different. Not in obvious ways. Eleanor and Alexander still dined together, still spent evenings in the library, still maintained the careful rhythms of their shared life. But something fundamental had shifted. Alexander was more present, less hidden behind work and distance. Eleanor was less guarded, less afraid to reach for his hand or smile at him across a room. They were learning from each other, learning how to be partners not just in duty but in truth. And then, a month after the musical, everything changed. It started with the invitation to the Hastings Ball, the event Alexander had mentioned weeks ago, the occasion for which Eleanor's ruby silk armor had been specifically commissioned. It was one of the premier events of the winter season, attended by everyone who mattered in London society. "Are you certain you want to attend?" Alexander asked one evening as they reviewed the invitation. "After the musical, society knows about your breach with your mother. There will be gossip. Let them gossip." Eleanor was surprised by her own confidence. "I'm the Duchess of Greystone. They can whisper all they like. I'll hold my head high." Something that might have been pride flickered in Alexander's eyes. "That's my Duchess." The possessiveness in his voice made Eleanor's heart skip. They still hadn't discussed what they were becoming, whether the careful tenderness between them constituted love or simply deep affection. But Eleanor felt it growing, this connection that was more than respect, more than partnership. She was falling in love with her husband. The realization should have frightened her. Alexander had been very clear that love wasn't something he believed in or wanted. But Eleanor couldn't help it. His careful protection of her dignity. The way he brought books he thought she'd enjoy dinner. How he'd learned she preferred silence in the morning and conversation in the evening. The rare smiles he gave her that transformed his severe face into something almost boyish. She was falling, and she didn't know if Alexander would catch her. The night of the Hastings ball, Eleanor dressed with exceptional care. The ruby silk gown fit perfectly. The sapphire jewelry glittered at her throat and ears. Mary had arranged her dark hair in an elaborate style that made her look regal, powerful. When Eleanor descended the stairs, Alexander was waiting in the foyer. He looked up at her approach, and whatever he'd been about to say died on his lips. Eleanor. Her name was barely a breath. You're magnificent. The dress is effective armor, Eleanor said, trying for lightness even as heat rose in her cheeks at the way he was looking at her. It's not the dress. Alexander came to the bottom of the stairs, offering his hand. It's you. You look like someone who could command kingdoms. I'll settle for commanding respect at a ball, Eleanor replied, but she couldn't hide her pleasure at the compliment. The Hastings ball was everything Eleanor had heard. Opulent, crowded, glittering with wealth and title. As she and Alexander entered, a hush fell over the room. All eyes turned toward them. They're staring, Eleanor murmured. Let them, Alexander replied, his hand firm on hers. They're staring because you're the most beautiful woman here, and because I'm clearly besotted with my wife. Neither is scandalous. Besotted. The word made Eleanor's heart race. Was he? Or was he simply playing a role for society's benefit? They made their way through the ballroom, accepting congratulations on their marriage, deflecting nosy questions about the hasty wedding, projecting an image of perfect unity. Eleanor smiled and nodded and said all the right things, playing Duchess with the skill of someone who'd been trained for performance her entire life. But she was acutely aware of whispers following them. Murmurs about the broken betrothal to Lord Craven. Speculation about how Eleanor had trapped a duke. Cruel assessments of her worth. Alexander heard them too. She could feel the tension in his arm, the barely controlled fury at hearing his wife insulted. Ignore them, she whispered. They're not worth your anger. They're insulting you, Alexander said through gritted teeth. They're envious. There's a difference. Eleanor squeezed his arm. Dance with me. Show them we don't care what they think. Alexander led her onto the dance floor. It was the first time they'd danced together. There hadn't been dancing at their private wedding. No opportunities since. Eleanor wasn't sure what to expect. She should have known Alexander would be perfect at it. He moved with the same controlled grace he brought to everything, guiding her through the waltz with confident ease. You dance well, Eleanor observed. Another useless aristocratic skill drilled into me as a child. But Alexander was smiling slightly. Though I confess, dancing with you is far more pleasant than dancing with the vapid debutantes my mother tried to foist on me. You're comparing me to vapid debutantes? How romantic. I'm saying you're nothing like them. You have thoughts in your head and fire in your eyes and the courage to stand up to dowagers without flinching. Alexander's voice dropped lower. You're extraordinary, Eleanor. Surely you know that by now. Eleanor's breath caught. Before she could respond, the music ended. They separated, applauding politely. I need a moment, Eleanor said. The retiring room. I'll wait here. Eleanor made her way through the crowd toward the ladies' retiring room. She needed a moment to collect herself, to calm her racing heart, to process the way Alexander had looked at her while dancing. She was halfway there when she heard a familiar voice. Well, the infamous Duchess of Greystone. Eleanor turned. Lady Craven, Lord Richard Craven's sister, stood behind her, flanked by two other women Eleanor recognized as members of the Tun's most vicious gossip circle. Lady Craven, Eleanor said coolly. How unexpected. I imagine it is, seeing as you ruined my brother and then immediately trapped a duke into marriage. Lady Craven's smile was venomous. Tell me, Your Grace, What particular arts did you use to ensnare Greystone? My brother said you were terribly forward, offering yourself before marriage. Is that how you secured the Duke? Through whorish behavior. The accusation was so shocking, so utterly false, that for a moment Eleanor couldn't speak. I'll thank you for not spreading lies about my wife. Alexander had appeared from nowhere, his face like thunder. Eleanor had never seen him truly angry before. It was terrifying and somehow exhilarating. Your Grace. Lady Craven had gone pale. I was merely slandering the Duchess of Greystone with vicious lies that could destroy a woman's reputation. Alexander's voice was ice. I heard every word, and I want you to understand something very clearly. He stepped closer to Lady Craven, forcing her to look up at him. Eleanor refused your brother because he's a cruel, manipulative man who broke his first 2 wives with systematic abuse. She didn't trap me into anything. I pursued her. I proposed to her. I married her because she's worth 10 of anyone else in this room. His voice rang with absolute conviction. If I hear one more whisper suggesting otherwise, I will destroy every member of your family socially and financially. Have I made myself clear? Lady Craven nodded, too shocked to speak. Alexander took Eleanor's arm. We're leaving. They didn't say goodbye to their hosts. Alexander simply guided Eleanor through the ballroom, through the entrance hall, out into the cold night air. Their carriage was summoned. They climbed inside in silence. Eleanor was shaking, not from fear, from overwhelming emotion. Alexander's defense had been public, fierce, absolute. He'd claimed her in front of everyone who mattered, made it clear that attacking her meant war with him. I'm sorry, Alexander said as the carriage began to move. I shouldn't have lost my temper. It will cause talk. I don't care about talk, Eleanor said, her voice unsteady. Alexander, you just defended me against one of the most powerful gossips in London. You made it clear that I matter more to you than social peace. Of course you matter more. Alexander turned to face her. Eleanor, surely you realize, he stopped, swallowed hard. Surely you understand what you've become to me. Do I? Eleanor's heart was racing. You've never said it clearly. You've shown me in 100 small ways, but you've never said the words. Because saying the words makes it real. Make it something I can lose. Alexander's hands clenched into fists. I told you I don't know how to do this. I told you I'm not capable of love. And I told you that you were wrong. Eleanor reached for his hands, uncurling the fists, lacing their fingers together. Alexander, you've loved me since the night you found me in the snow. You've just been too afraid to call it what it is. If I love you, if I admit I love you, then I become vulnerable. Alexander's voice was raw. I become my mother, capable of being destroyed by caring too much. Or, Eleanor said softly, you become someone who has something real, something worth protecting, something that makes all the careful distance you've built feel like the prison it is. Alexander stared at their joined hands. I don't know how to be loved, Eleanor. I don't know what you want from me. I want you to stop being afraid. Eleanor leaned forward, close enough to see the gold flecks in his dark eyes. I want you to admit that what we have is more than respect and partnership. I want you to trust that I won't destroy you the way your father destroyed your mother. My father destroyed my mother by not loving her, Alexander said. I'm afraid of destroying you by not knowing how. Then let me teach you. Eleanor kissed him gently. Let me show you that love isn't possession or control or the loss of self. It's choosing each other. Every day. Even when it's hard. Especially when it's hard. Alexander pulled her into his arms with sudden desperation, holding her as though she might disappear. I'm terrified, he admitted against her hair. I'm terrified of how much I need you, how empty this house was before you, how unbearable the thought of losing you is. That's love, Eleanor whispered. That terror is love, Alexander. I don't want it to be. His arms tightened. I don't want to need anyone this much. Too late. Eleanor pulled back enough to see his face. You already do. You have since that first night. You're just finally admitting it. Alexander looked at her for a long moment. Then, with visible effort, he said the words that had been building for weeks. I love you. 3 words. Simple. Devastating. I love you, he repeated, as if saying it again would make it easier. I love your courage and your fire and the way you refuse to let me hide. I love how you read dangerous books and stand up to your mother and look at me like I'm more than a title. His voice cracked. I love you so much it terrifies me, Eleanor. And I don't know what to do with that. Eleanor's eyes filled with tears. You hold on to it. You trust it. You let yourself be happy. I don't know how to be happy, Alexander admitted. I've spent 18 years being careful and controlled and safe. Then we'll learn that together too. Eleanor kissed him again, deeper this time. I love you, Alexander Thorne. I love your careful protections and your hidden softness and the way you defend me against gossip. I love how you bring me books and pour brandy at 2 in the morning and hold me when I have nightmares. She rested her forehead against his. You're not cold. You're not incapable. You're just someone who was hurt young and learned to protect himself. But you don't have to protect yourself from me. Alexander kissed her with a desperation that spoke of years of loneliness, of walls finally crumbling, of a heart learning to risk itself again. When they finally pulled apart, both breathing hard, he said, I was going to wait, to let you have your own chambers, let this be the careful distance we agreed to. But Eleanor, I don't want distance anymore. I want me, Eleanor finished. You want me, all of me. Yes. The word was barely a breath. If you'll have me, if I haven't waited too long. You haven't. Eleanor's smile was radiant. Take me home, Alexander. Our home. And let me show you what love looks like when it's real. The carriage couldn't move fast enough. When they arrived at Greystone House, Alexander lifted Eleanor out of the carriage himself, carrying her through the front door as Hastings looked on with carefully controlled surprise. We're not to be disturbed, Alexander told the butler. For anything. Is that clear? Perfectly clear, Your Grace. Hastings's lips twitched in what might have been a smile. May I say congratulations? On what? Eleanor asked, still in Alexander's arms. On finding each other properly, Hastings said. This house has been too quiet for too long. Alexander carried Eleanor up the stairs to his chambers, their chambers now. He set her down carefully at the threshold. Are you certain? He asked. Once we cross this line, I won't be able to maintain distance. I'll want you always. Completely. Good, Eleanor said, taking his hand and pulling him inside. Because I want the same thing. The door closed behind them, shutting out the world. And inside, in the privacy of silk sheets and candlelight and years of loneliness finally ending, Alexander and Eleanor discovered that love, when it was built on respect and truth and hard-won trust, was worth every moment of terror. Eleanor woke to sunlight streaming through windows she didn't immediately recognize. Then memory returned in a warm rush. Alexander's chambers. Their chambers now. The night before. The ball, the confrontation, the confession, the glorious dissolution of every wall that had kept them careful and distant. She was wrapped in Alexander's arms, his chest against her back, one hand spread possessively over her stomach. Even in sleep, he held her as though afraid she might disappear. Eleanor smiled and settled deeper into his embrace. You're awake, Alexander murmured against her shoulder. So are you. I've been awake for an hour, watching you sleep. His voice was still rough with it. Is that acceptable behavior? Or should I pretend I wasn't? Eleanor laughed and turned in his arms to face him. Alexander's dark hair was disheveled, his severe features softened by morning light and genuine happiness. It's acceptable, she assured him, provided you're prepared for me to do the same to you. I suppose the turnabout is fair. Alexander traced her cheek with one finger. Eleanor, about last night. If you're about to apologize for finally admitting you love me, I'll be very disappointed. Not apologize. Just, I want you to know that I meant it. Every word. I'm not going to retreat into cold again. This is permanent. Eleanor felt her throat tighten. Good, because I'm not giving you back your emotional armor. I'm burning it. Alexander's laugh was surprising and genuine. That's the most violent thing you've ever said to me. I contain multitudes. Eleanor kissed him softly. Now, shall we face the world as properly besotted newlyweds, or hide in here for another week? Another week sounds appealing. They didn't quite manage a week, but they did spend 3 days in their rooms, having meals brought up, ignoring correspondence, existing in a private bubble where nothing mattered except learning each other completely. On the 4th day, reality intruded in the form of Mr. Thornberry, who appeared at the study door looking apologetic. Your Grace, I'm sorry to disturb you, but there's been a development regarding the Ashford family. Eleanor, who had been reading while Alexander worked, looked up. What kind of development? Your sister, Miss Catherine Ashford, is here. She's asking to speak with you. Thornberry paused. Alone. Eleanor and Alexander exchanged glances. They'd heard nothing from Catherine since the musicale 6 weeks ago. Show her to the morning room, Eleanor decided. I'll see her. I'm coming with you, Alexander said immediately. No. Eleanor touched his hand. Let me do this alone. If Catherine has found her courage, I don't want her to feel ambushed. Alexander clearly wanted to argue, but he nodded. I'll be in the study if you need me. Catherine was standing by the window when Eleanor entered the morning room. She'd lost weight, Eleanor noticed. Her face was drawn, her eyes red from recent crying. But she stood straight, and there was something in her bearing that was different from before. Less performed, more real. Eleanor. Catherine turned, and fresh tears spilled down her cheeks. Thank you for seeing me. Catherine. Eleanor gestured to the chairs. Sit, please. They sat facing each other, a year of estrangement between them like a physical thing. I'm sorry, Catherine said immediately. I know I apologized at the musicale, but I need to say it properly. I'm sorry for what I said the night Mother cast you out. I'm sorry for not defending you. I'm sorry for being her puppet for so long that I forgot how to be human. Eleanor studied with her sister. What changed? You did. Seeing you at the musical, standing up to Mother without flinching. Watching you walk away with your head high, the Duchess of Greystone, absolutely unbroken. Catherine's voice shook. You were everything I'd been told I should be. Obedient, marriageable, perfect. And Mother destroyed you for being more than that. And it made me realize that I didn't want to be perfect anymore. I wanted to be real. What did Mother say when you told her that? She hasn't spoken to me in 3 weeks. Catherine wiped her eyes. She's trying to arrange a marriage for me to Lord Hartwell. He's 58 and looking for a 3rd wife. When I refused, she told me I was being as difficult as you were. As though that were the ultimate insult. And I realized she was right. I was being like you. Finally, Catherine reached for Eleanor's hand. I came to ask if you meant what you said, about being sisters again if I found my spine. Because I think I'm finding it, but I need help. I need someone who'll teach me how to be brave. Eleanor felt her eyes sting. This was the sister she'd always hoped Catherine could be. Not their mother's doll, but her own person. I meant it, Eleanor said. But Catherine, you need to understand. I can't fix your relationship with Mother. I can't make that easier for you. I don't want you to. I don't want a relationship with her anymore. Catherine's jaw set with newfound determination. I want a relationship with you, and if that means choosing between you and her, I choose you. I should have chosen you that night. Eleanor pulled Catherine into a fierce embrace. Then welcome to rebellion, little sister. It's terrifying and wonderful, and you're going to love it. Catherine laughed through her tears. Where do I start? You start, Eleanor said, pulling back and smiling. By meeting my husband properly, and then we discuss getting you out of Mother's house permanently. Catherine stayed for luncheon, during which Alexander was his usual controlled self, assessing Catherine with the same careful eye he'd once assessed Eleanor. But by the end of the meal, he'd apparently decided Catherine was genuine in her reform. You're welcome here whenever you need refuge, he told Catherine. Eleanor's sister is my sister now. The casual declaration made Eleanor's heart swell. After Catherine left, promising to write soon and to continue working on her independence, Eleanor found Alexander in the library. "That was kind of you," she said. "Accepting Catherine. She's trying. That's all any of us can do." Alexander pulled Eleanor onto his lap, a casual intimacy that still felt new and wonderful. "Besides, you love her. That makes her worth protecting." Eleanor kissed him. "You realize you're becoming quite soft, Duke Greystone. Only with you. The rest of the world still considers me terrifying." "Good. I like being the only one who sees this side of you." They were interrupted by Hastings with the afternoon post. Most of it was routine invitations, business correspondence. But one letter made Alexander's expression darken. "What is it?" Eleanor asked. "Lord Craven is contesting our marriage. He's filed a complaint with the church courts claiming you were contracted to him and therefore not free to marry me." Eleanor's stomach dropped. "Can he do that?" "He can try. But he'll lose." Alexander's voice was absolute. "You refused him publicly before a dozen witnesses. There was no formal contract. And I have excellent solicitors." He set the letter aside. "Don't worry, Eleanor. I won't let him take you from me." "I'm not worried." Eleanor meant it. "I trust you." The case took 3 months to resolve. During that time, Eleanor and Alexander presented a united front to society, attending events, hosting dinners at Greystone House, showing London that their marriage was not only legitimate but genuinely affectionate. The gossips who had whispered about Eleanor trapping a duke fell silent as it became obvious that Alexander was completely besotted with his wife. The accusations of impropriety faded as Eleanor proved herself a gracious, intelligent duchess who could hold her own in any conversation. And when the church courts finally dismissed Lord Craven's complaint with prejudice, ruling that he'd had no claim on Eleanor whatsoever, it felt less like victory than simple acknowledgement of what had always been true. Eleanor belonged with Alexander. The law was merely catching up to reality. To celebrate, Alexander surprised Eleanor with a trip to Greystone Hall in Northumberland, the estate Eleanor had heard about but never seen. It was magnificent. A castle, really, perched on cliffs overlooking the sea, all grey stone and dramatic beauty. It looked like something from a Gothic novel. "It's been in my family for 300 years, Alexander explained as they approached. "My mother loved it here, away from my father, away from London. She said it was the one place she could breathe." Eleanor understood immediately why. Greystone Hall was wild, windswept, remote. It was freedom given architectural form. The staff welcomed them warmly. Unlike London servants who maintained perfect distance, these people clearly loved their duke and were delighted to see him with a wife who made him smile. "The Duchess's rooms are prepared," the housekeeper informed them, though His Grace requested that the connecting door be unlocked. "There won't be separate rooms," Alexander said calmly. "We'll share my chambers. Please prepare the Duchess's rooms as her private study instead." The housekeeper's face brightened. "Right away, Your Grace." Eleanor waited until they were alone to ask, "A private study? You need space that's entirely yours, where you can write letters, read dangerous books, think dangerous thoughts." Alexander smiled. "Besides, I've become accustomed to waking up with you. Separate rooms seem like poor planning." Eleanor threw her arms around his neck. "Have I mentioned recently that I love you?" "Not in the past hour." I was beginning to worry. They spent a month at Greystone Hall, walking the cliffs, exploring tide pools, sitting in comfortable silence in the library while wind and waves crashed outside. It was a different life from London. Quieter, simpler, more honest. It was perfect. One evening, as they sat by the fire in Alexander's study, Eleanor reading aloud from a book of poetry while Alexander worked through correspondence, she felt a contentment so complete it was almost frightening. "What are you thinking?" Alexander asked, noticing her pause. "That I'm happy," Eleanor admitted. "Genuinely, completely happy. And that it seems impossible that 6 months ago I was standing in a snowstorm with nothing." Alexander set down his pen and came to sit beside her. "6 months ago, I was alone in this house, convinced I was content with loneliness, convinced that caring about anyone was dangerous. And now I know that the real danger is living without you. He took her hand, running his thumb over her wedding ring and the greystone betrothal ring above it. Eleanor, there's something I need to tell you. Eleanor's heart skipped. That sounds ominous. Not ominous. Just. Alexander seemed to be choosing his words carefully. I told you I married you as a transaction, that I needed a wife and you needed protection. And at the time I believed that was true. But it wasn't? No. Or it was, but it was never only that. Alexander met her eyes. The truth is, I saw you in that snow, refusing to beg, refusing to diminish yourself even as you lost everything. And I saw courage I'd never possessed. And I thought, I need that courage near me. I need to protect that courage. I need to see what happens when someone that brave isn't broken by the world. Alexander, let me finish. His grip on her hand tightened. I didn't rescue you, Eleanor. You rescued me. You walked into my carefully controlled life and refused to let me hide. You loved me before I knew how to love you back. You taught me that being vulnerable isn't weakness. It's the bravest thing anyone can do. Eleanor's eyes were wet. You would have figured that out eventually. No, I wouldn't have. I'd have died in this house. Alone. Surrounded by wealth and power and absolutely nothing that mattered. Alexander pulled her closer. You gave me a life worth living. I don't have words to thank you for that. Then don't use words. Eleanor kissed him softly. Just keep loving me. That's thanks enough. I can do that. Alexander smiled against her lips. I can do that for the next 50 years if you'll let me. 50 years? Eleanor teased. Is that all? 60 then. 70. However long I have, it's yours. They sat in peaceful silence for a while, Eleanor tucked against Alexander's chest, listening to his heartbeat steady and sure. Eleanor, Alexander said eventually. Would you like children? Eleanor pulled back to look at him. They talked about an heir in abstract terms, but never like this, never as something real and present and wanted. Would you? She asked carefully. Yes. Alexander looked surprised by his own answer. I never thought I would, but I keep imagining a little girl with your eyes and your courage. Or a boy who's brave enough to question everything, the way you do. I want that. I want a family that's built on love rather than duty. Eleanor felt joy bloom in her chest. Then yes, I want children. With you. A whole army of them if we're fortunate. Let's start with one and see how we manage, Alexander suggested, but he was smiling. Though I warn you, I have no idea how to be a father. You'll learn. The same way you learned to be a husband. Eleanor kissed him again. Besides, you're already better than your father was. You know how not to be. The rest we'll figure out together. Together, Alexander echoed. I like the sound of that. 2 years later, Eleanor stood in the nursery at Greystone Hall, holding her daughter, Sophia Margaret Thorne, with Alexander's dark hair and Eleanor's determination to have her own way in all things. She's perfect, Catherine said from the doorway. Eleanor's sister had moved to a small house on the Greystone estate 6 months ago, finally completely independent of their mother. She visited weekly, bringing watercolors. She discovered a real talent for painting, and slowly building the relationship with Eleanor she should have had all along. She's stubborn, Eleanor corrected fondly. She gets that from both of us. Where's Alexander? Dealing with estate matters. He'll be up soon. He can't stay away from her for more than 2 hours. Eleanor smiled. It's adorable and slightly concerning how besotted he is. It runs in the family, apparently. Catherine grinned. Have you heard from Mother? No. You? She sent a letter last month. I demanded that I apologize and return home. Catherine's smile faded. I burned it. Good. They heard footsteps on the stairs. Alexander appeared, slightly disheveled from riding, and went straight to Eleanor and Sophia. Is she still sleeping? He asked softly. Like an angel, until she wakes and screams like a tyrant, at which point you can take a turn walking her. Fair. Alexander kissed Eleanor's temple. then gazed at his daughter with an expression of such complete love that Eleanor's heart ached. She's extraordinary. She's 3 months old. She mostly eats, sleeps, and makes demands. Still extraordinary. Alexander looked at Eleanor. Like her mother. Catherine cleared her throat. I'll leave you three alone. I have to work in the garden. After she left, Alexander pulled Eleanor and Sophia closer, the three of them a complete unit. Do you remember? Eleanor said quietly. That first night? When you found me in the snow and told me I belonged with you. Every detail, Alexander confirmed. Did you know then? That this is what we'd become? Alexander was quiet for a moment, thinking. No, I knew I couldn't leave you there. I knew you deserved better than dying in the street. But I didn't know. He paused. I didn't know that you'd become everything. That this house would feel empty when you're not in it. That I'd spend meetings thinking about what you'd say if you were there. That I'd love you so completely that it rewrites how I understand the world. Eleanor leaned into him, careful not to wake Sophia. I love you too. So much that it still frightens me sometimes. Good, Alexander said. Fear means it matters. And this, he gestured at the three of them at the nursery, at Greystone Hall beyond the windows. This matters more than anything else in the world. Outside, the sun set over the cliffs, painting the sky in shades of gold and rose. The sea crashed against the rocks below. And in the nursery, surrounded by love hard-won and carefully built, Eleanor Thorne, Duchess of Greystone, knew with absolute certainty. She was home, not because of the title or the wealth or the magnificent house, but because she'd found someone who saw her as fully human, complex, flawed, brave, and worthy of love exactly as she was. And Alexander, the cold duke who'd claimed he couldn't feel, had found someone brave enough to teach him that the heart's greatest strength was in its willingness to be vulnerable. They had saved each other, and in doing so, they'd built something neither had imagined possible. A family, a home, a love that would last lifetimes. Do you remember? Eleanor said quietly. That first night? When you found me in the snow and told me I belonged with you. Every detail, Alexander confirmed. Did you know then? That this is what we'd become? Alexander was quiet for a moment, thinking. No, I knew I couldn't leave you there. I knew you deserved better than dying in the street. But I didn't know. He paused. I didn't know that you'd become everything. That this house would feel empty when you're not in it. That I'd spend meetings thinking about what you'd say if you were there. That I'd love you so completely that it rewrites how I understand the world. Eleanor leaned into him, careful not to wake Sophia. I love you too. So much that it still frightens me sometimes. Good, Alexander said. Fear means it matters. And this, he gestured at the three of them at the nursery, at Greystone Hall beyond the windows. This matters more than anything else in the world. Outside, the sun set over the cliffs, painting the sky in shades of gold and rose. The sea crashed against the rocks below. And in the nursery, surrounded by love hard-won and carefully built, Eleanor Thorne, Duchess of Greystone, knew with absolute certainty. She was home, not because of the title or the wealth or the magnificent house, but because she'd found someone who saw her as fully human, complex, flawed, brave, and worthy of love exactly as she was. And Alexander, the cold duke who'd claimed he couldn't feel, had found someone brave enough to teach him that the heart's greatest strength was in its willingness to be vulnerable. They had saved each other, and in doing so, they'd built something neither had imagined possible. A family, a home, a love that would last lifetimes.